Hello, welcome to our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. What we want to do in this study is we want to, as best as we can, understand what this book is about, and also then to apply it to our lives as much as is possible. What we need to know is that this is not necessarily an easy thing to do, because this book has been labeled by some as the most difficult book in the Bible. And others have said that it is the black sheep of the Bible. And why is that? Well, here's what one person wrote and perhaps explains this to us. It says, the book of Ecclesiastes is one of the most unusual and perhaps most difficult to understand books of the Bible. It has a spirit of hopeless despair. It has no praise or peace. It seems to promote questionable conduct. Yet these words show us the futility and the foolishness of a life lived without an eternal perspective. So right off the top, we see what the point of this book is about. It's that if you live life and you don't factor in God, if there's no eternal perspective in your life, then life is meaningless. That is the message. But along the way, the speaker, who identifies himself as the teacher, that's one way to call himself. The teacher says some things, gives advice, and this advice may be true or it may not be true. So you have to sort through it and say, is this something I really want to take to heart, and can I apply it or not? So basically what he's doing in this, as he speaks, and we need to understand this if we're going to understand the book of Ecclesiastes, is this person who we're identifying as the teacher is looking at life. He's looking at life. He's examining life. He's examining his life, his own life too, from a perspective of what he can see, what is there visible to him, that which is he can touch and reason, the reason that he has, devoid of God revealing things to him, what life would be about. So here we go. We take off with chapter 1 and verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. The word teacher is used here. It's the translation of a Hebrew word that is pronounced something like geleth and is translated into the Greek as Ecclesiastes. And that's where we get the name of the book from. But it means, in this case, teacher or preacher or the leader of assembly. So somebody who's in a position to have some influence. And what does this person do? Well, he's the son of David, king in Jerusalem. We're going to talk more about who the author of this book is and who this particular teacher is. But what does he say? He says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. He doesn't say this once. He says this 30 times. He says this 30 times in this short book, that everything is meaningless. In the King James Bible, it says vanity of vanities. The word means empty or useless, without substance. And it's in the superlative, so it means very much meaningless. Okay? And he's saying everything is such. And he asks the question, what does a man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? Under the sun is another expression that he uses many times, and when he does, he's talking about here on earth, here in the material world. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains the same. People come, people go, but everything's the same. And he talks about the sameness in the next several verses. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and to the north. Round and round it goes, even returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place that the streams come from, they return again. So everything is just going through the motions, doing it again and again and again. Verse 9, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. No, everything is, this is what he's saying, this is what he's observing, is that everything that is already was, and the same thing is going to happen in the future. Verse 10, is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. No, you can't, because whatever is was there before. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Once you're gone, you're forgotten. Now we get some identification of who the speaker is. Verse 12, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and explore by wisdom. Who is it that's associated with wisdom? All that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I've seen all things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So people think, well, for a long time, everybody has assumed that the speaker, the teacher here, was Solomon, who was the king of Jerusalem, Judah, and he was also the son of David. Verse 16, I thought to myself, look, I've grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. And he was noted for that, wasn't he? I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned this, too, is a chasing after the wind. Chasing after the wind, futile. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. So he's saying even wisdom is futile because you know more, so therefore you suffer more. But if you don't have this wisdom, you have less grief in your life. Is that true? And then he says in chapter 2, that all forms of pleasure are meaningless. He says, I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Under heaven means here on earth. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. So, probably could be Solomon is talking about himself, and he says that he tried all sorts of pleasures that he could think of. Wine and women, verse 3 and verse 8, he talks about plenty of those in his life. Accomplishing great projects, houses, vineyards, gardens, parks. Yes. And he gathered the world's luxuries and delights, slaves, herds, silver, and gold. So he had this opportunity to let himself go, and he was in this place where he could do anything he wanted, and have anything he wanted. And what does he deduce? Verses 10 and 11. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all of my labor. Yet when I surveyed that all my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Everything he did, all that he gathered, every experience that he brought into his life, and he had the opportunity to bring many of all different kinds, and seemingly good ones. And when he examines them all, he comes to the same conclusion. They're all meaningless, all meaningless. They're vapor. They have no substance to them, just vanity. He says in the end, wisdom and folly are meaningless. Verse 12. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. So he's saying, as I'm looking around, he's speaking, the teacher, he says, I do think that wisdom is better than folly, but the one who is wise and the one who is foolish, not wise, have the same fate. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. This is his conclusion. In the end, this is the fate of both. The wise man dies, the fool dies. So the wise man ends up with the same fate as the fool. Then he says, toil is meaningless. Verse 17. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun here on earth, because I must leave them to one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then he must leave all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labors under the sun? All his days, his work is pain and grief. Even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is meaningless. Here's this person who is working hard, toiling. At night, he's up at night. He loses sleep over his work. He gains much. He dies, and he leaves it all to somebody else who might not even be wise. And so the teacher is saying, that too is meaningless, to give yourself and to break yourself like this and to work so hard like this, to acquire so much, only to have to leave it to somebody who could waste it. Verse 24, A man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after this wind. This is interesting. This is the first time now that he's mentioned God, and he's mentioned him 3 times. So it's be clear that this man, this teacher, Solomon, is not an atheist. And he does say some things that are good and worth thinking about it. And what he is saying here is a wisdom that should be taken into our lives. That God gives things into our lives. He's the one that provides it, and we should find enjoyment from them. Chapter 3. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. So that's the thesis statement for what he's going to say next. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity. And now, poetically, he lists those. And we've heard these before. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. So he pretty well, through all those couplets, has given us a scope of life. And he's saying all of these things can happen in life. And then he gives some perspective on that in the verses that follow. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden of God has laid on men. Then he makes 3 conclusions. 3 conclusions here, all in verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. So he's talking now about all these different times that there are, all these different activities in life. And he's speaking as if God then has overseen these times, and that God is in charge. God is in charge. Then he says something that's very important. He says, he has set eternity in the hearts of men. So God has put within people that desire to understand things beyond the material. That seems to be what he's saying. And then he says, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. Well, this fits in with what we're talking about. People on their own reason can look around and deduce things from what they see, and using their intelligence and their reason, but without the help of God, without the help of revelation, they really can't comprehend it completely, fathom its depths. Verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and to do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is a gift of God. He hasn't given up talking about God and God providing this life. And it's a gift to be alive, and you should find satisfaction in it. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away from it. God does it so that men will revere him. That's what people should do. They should worship him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I thought in my heart, God will bring to judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. Seems to be saying that people live their lives on this earth under the vision of God, that they should enjoy life, but also that God is a judge and he will see the good and the bad that is being done by a person while they're here on earth. I also thought, as for men, God tests them so that they may see that they are like animals. In a moment, he's going to tell us that the fate of men and animals is very similar. As he said a moment ago, that the fate of wise men and fools was very similar. Man's fate is like that of animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Listen to this. Who knows if the spirit of man rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? This is interesting, because he's been talking about God, he's been talking about judgment, but here he's raising the question about, is there anything after life? Maybe people and animals have the same fate. Maybe they just go to the same place. So I saw there is nothing better for a man than to enjoy his work, because that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? If this is the case, then you might as well just, what does he say? To enjoy your work. Enjoy your work. Chapter 4. Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. More observations. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still living. But better than both is he who has not yet been born, who has not even seen evil that is done under the sun. He looks around, he sees people being oppressed, and he's saying, it's better once you've died, because then you're happier than living in this life and being oppressed, and you're still happier if you've never been born. So the best place to be, if it comes to being oppressed in some way, is first of all being dead, but even better than that, never having even seen the light of day as a person. And I saw, verse 4, and I saw that all labor and all achievement from man's envy of his neighbor, this too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hand and ruins himself. Better one hand with tranquility than two hands with toil and chasing after the wind. Again I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself in enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Here he says something that is worth thinking about, and that is that relationships having other people to live your life with, that gives life meaning, and is the best way to live life, living life with other people, supporting each other. Then he says, lastly, advancement is also meaningless. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to take mourning. The youth may have come from prison to kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So he's saying, here's the youth who either is from prison or poverty, and here's a foolish king, and the youth rises, and he even advances to the place where he now is in the position of being the king's successor. So he's risen, and that's great, but the people that then are under him, well, after a while, they're no longer pleased with him and cast him off. And this too, he says, is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So achievement or ambition, if you like, is just another form of meaninglessness. Okay, well, what can we say about our observations of this? Here are a few. First of all, the idea that life is without ultimate meaning is not an unusual one. Or that it is gloomy, that life is gloomy. That's not unusual. It's the position really of many modern people. Here are a few. One is Tennessee Williams. I can find out what he wrote in a minute. This is what he said, and he was a famous playwright. He said this: "We all live in a house on fire." He's talking about life. "We all live in a house on fire. No fire department to call, no way out, just the upstairs window to look out of while the fire burns the house down, with us trapped, locked inside." That's pretty gloomy. And that's the way this playwright, famous playwright, bright man, that's the way he saw life. Or George Orwell, another author, this is what he says: "Most people get a fair amount of fun out of their lives, but on balance, life is suffering, and only the very young or the very foolish imagine otherwise." Another gloomy perspective on life. And perhaps the most gloomy one that I discovered was that of Woody Allen. Many of us know Woody Allen as an actor or comedian or director, movie producer, bright man. But this is what Woody Allen said about life: "Human existence is a brutal experience to me. It's a brutal experience, an agonizing, meaningless experience with some oasis delight, some charm and peace, but these are just small oases. Overall, it is a brutal, terrible experience. I feel that life is divided into the horrible and the miserable." That's the two categories. Pretty gloomy. When the teacher is speaking here, he presents a fairly gloomy picture about life. He says meaningless a number of times. I've cited some famous people who have actually articulated very much what this man, the teacher, is saying. But there are a lot of people who are alive in this life who God is not a factor of their lives. they're not, they don't have an eternal perspective on things. And the way they see it, life is just like this. What's the point? What's the point anyway? So, what do? People without God seek to fill their emptiness through a variety of means. Here, and there are a lot of different ways that people who don't have God in their life and they only see this life and they're looking for meaning and purpose in life. These are the various ways that people seek after that. Work. Oh, lots of people. They're workaholics. That's where they get their well-being from. They think that that's going to be satisfying to them. Ambition, social action, doing good deeds, right? Academics, getting more degrees, more education, accomplishments, and so on. Lots of trying in their own effort to do something that they are going to feel good about themselves and feel good about their lives and say, yeah, my life has meaning, my life has purpose. So a lot of people who discount God chase after those kinds of things to find meaning in their lives. Other people take another course. They just give themselves up to pleasure. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die. I just might as well sap it up. I have a sinful nature. I might as well just, there might be not even saying that. I have a sinful nature. All they know is they want and they want and they want, and natural man wants pleasure for himself. So they just seek pleasure after pleasure after pleasure and never really find meaning. Here's the one really good thought that I think that the teacher left us with. God has set eternity into the hearts of men. He said that in chapter 3 and in verse 11. Most people have an awareness of existence beyond the world and seek meaning and interaction with God of some form. Even while people are chasing after other ways to find meaning, if they stop for a moment and ponder, and they have those moments in their lives, which most people do, they think about, well, is there something beyond? Is there maybe some God? And the way that we know that this is true is because there are so many different world religions. If we take the scope of the 8 billion people that are in the world, many of them are, many are involved in religious activity. They're gods, maybe false gods, but nevertheless, they are seeking to do something beyond what this life holds. There is a sense of the eternal or the extra human, transcending human life. God seems to have put that in human beings naturally in many places. Well, I can really relate to a lot of what the teacher is saying here. As a young man in my 20s, I really had everything, so to speak. I had a good education, I had a good family, I had material resources, even a house, a couple of cars. I was married, I had a wonderful wife, children. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden maybe, but I found myself in my 20s seeking and thinking about life sort of like the teacher is, thinking, what really is the meaning of life anyway? And why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? So it might be a bit gloomy, but it does provoke us to think about something that's important. Our lives, the meaning of them. God be with you.